How are you today, David?
I'm fine because it's late evening here. It's been not too bad a day.
So, have you had tea already?
Oh yeah, it's bedtime. It's 10 o'clock at night. It's like an hour past my bedtime.
Did you have, what do you call that famous thing they have in the breakfast? Butties and what do you call it? Mash? Butties and mash, you know.
Our most famous one is Scouse. That's why they're called Scousers. So people from Liverpool are called Scousers. And
I've got David Rosen now. He always comes on my interviews. He always comes on. First comment. David looks much older. Wait a minute. He goes, David looks much older than he looks. I mean, what a comment. You know his story.
Well, coming from a vampire like Charles Rosenay, that's quite impressive. So I'm okay with that. He's timeless, is Charles.
You know what gets to me now? We're going to get into Charles in a minute, right?
Yeah,
but definitely. You know everybody that I know before I met them. You know Chachi Lepret. Say hello to Chachi Lepret, David.
Oh, Chachi, good man. Nice to see you. How are you doing, mate?
That's it. Send him good regards.
Oh, definitely.
Breakfast with the Beatles. Fantastic show. Even you can tune in from Liverpool. You know that?
Oh, yeah.
You can download the app. You can download the app at Liverpool where you live.
Yeah.
Because someone said you live at Penny Lane where the bus stop is on top. Is that right?
I'm just off Penny Lane. Literally, I go up and down Penny Lane virtually every day. Well, I normally would because we're shut in at the moment. But yeah, I go up and down Penny Lane all the time. I've been there today, been through it. It's all around.
Where they did the film clip where they rode the horses. They're riding through the street, or John was walking.
No, that was filmed down south. That was in London.
Okay. So then they got footage of Penny Lane in the video.
Yeah. So you see the roundabout, you see the bus. You see a fireman. And in fact, the guy who was driving the fire engine for the video for Penny Lane still lives locally, and I occasionally bump into him at Penny Lane.
And at the pub? Do you meet him down a pub for a pint?
Oh, shocking. As if. No. People in Liverpool don't drink. Absolutely not.
No, they just watch soccer. They just watch Liverpool, yeah. I'm a fan. I'm a Liverpool fan.
Best team.
Now getting back to the Beatles, right? As I said, you know Jude.
Yeah, Jude's a very good friend of mine.
Kessler.
Yeah.
And not only that, you helped publish this book by Michael Hill that went to school with John Lennon. And there's John. Wait a minute. That's John there.
John.
And there's Michael Hill.
There's Michael. That's right. And that's Don Beatty in between the two of them.
Who else do you know there?
Yeah, so the guy with his head down is Don Beatty. And he was Michael's best friend at school. So some friends of mine sent me Michael's story and said he needs to get it published. So I helped him get it published. Actually with, having just mentioned Jude Kessler, with Jude's husband, Rand. So Rand acted as publisher. I sort of edited and helped get it together, and then I act sort of as agent for Michael and try and sell as many copies for him as possible. It's a fantastic book, honestly. That's why I got involved, because it's such a unique story. It really is.
But great book. Know, I've interviewed Michael twice.
Good Aussie
lad. I can't believe that he lives in Melbourne, up the road from me. I love the guy.
He's even picked up an Australian accent.
Has he?
Yeah.
I don't want him to lose that Scouser accent. Where can they get that book?
You can get it from Michael's website, which is John Lennon Legend.
Yeah.
Which I set up for him. Or there's a brand new website I've just set up for Beatles authors, and it's called BeatlesBookstore.com. So you can get my books on there, Michael's book, Jude Kessler's books on there. There's about a dozen or more of us authors already, and more coming on all the time. So if you like your books direct from the author, come on to BeatlesBookstore.com.
Now tell me about Jude's books. Listen, it's taken, don't get me wrong, it's taken 35 years to write 4.
She's thorough.
Yeah, but wait a minute. How long is it going to take to write the other 9 and the other 5?
Don't worry, she'll live to 130. She's fine. She's only 21.
I love the lady, but it just hit me yesterday because I interviewed her. It's taken her 35 years to write 4, and those books are massive. Oh, yeah. It's like the Bible. It's like the Bible of the Beatles, of John Lennon, sorry.
Yeah, and that's just it in short bits of it. Absolutely amazing books. The way she writes them as well.
I don't think I could write a children's story more than 10 pages.
Yeah, I have a problem of doing short books as well. But it's great. We all have this passion. And we don't ever get into this to make any money, which is just as well. But we do it because we love what we do.
But that's what I do. I love what I do. I just love it for the music, for the Beatles, for the Monkeys, for the people that I meet. Do you know I've got so many people want to come on my show that I'm not sleeping anymore. It's like I'm on 24 hours. Do you know the best interviews are the ones where they're in Los Angeles? Like I just did one now. And I'm up at 4 a.m. because it's 11 o'clock there. And I don't even know the times. My iPhone has got 200 country times on it. So I know when to get up. And only once I missed an interview. I got times wrong.
I've done that.
You know about this book. I'm going to test your knowledge now, David, all right? I'm going to show you a book, and I want you to tell me about this book. You ready?
Go. Oh, yes. One of my favorites. Love that book.
Let's get it going now.
Yeah.
Because it's got like Batman background here. Okay.
Yeah. Fantastic book. The Beatle Who Vanished by Jim Birkenstadt.
That's the one.
It's one of the best Beatles books. Honestly, I remember when, because I met Jim a few years ago at the Beatle Fest, and when I read it, it is just phenomenal. The work he's done is brilliant. And it's all the story of Jimmy Nicol, which of course you'll recognise for Down Under, because it's those couple of weeks when Ringo ended up in hospital.
Exactly, and then he came and he met up in Melbourne. I live in Melbourne.
Yeah.
David, I live in Melbourne. This book, everyone's got to buy Jim's Birkenstadt's book. Everyone's got to buy David Hill's book. Everyone's got to buy Jude Southland Kessler's book. But more importantly, everyone's got to buy your books. Now, before we go, we move on. Do you know where Jimmy Nicol is? Or have you got any leads? Or what have you uncovered? Or what have you written? Tell me now.
Well, because I actually covered a part of Jimmy's story in the last book that I did called Finding the Fourth Beatle. So I'll throw a question back to you.
Please.
How many Beatles drummers can you name?
I can. There was a guy that worked at the Bottle Works, guess some name, and he said, I don't want to be part of the Beatles.
Yeah.
What's his name?
Yeah, Tommy Moore.
Yeah, that's a guy. Yeah. And we know about Pete Best.
Yeah, that's two.
And do you want another drummer?
Yeah.
All right, go on, tell me.
Well, I've got 23.
Okay. Well, that's a lot, isn't it?
Yeah. So I looked at all the drummers who played with them from when they were the Quarrymen in '56 right through to 1950.
Go for it. Can you say it without looking? Come on.
Well, you got the most important ones were the permanent ones. So you got Colin Hanton, who did the first 2 years. So he quits in spring of '59. Yep. So then you're looking at the drummers in 1960. Now, they went through a lot of drummers. Some only made like one appearance. Yep. So your main guys are Tommy Moore, we just mentioned. Johnny Hutchinson played once. Cliff Roberts played once. Tommy Moore was replaced by Norman Chapman. Norman Chapman should have gone to Hamburg with the Beatles. Then about a week or so before they were due to go, he got called up to join the army to do his national service. So Norman Chapman was out, and that's when they got Pete Best in. Then Pete's the drummer for 2 years. Then he's replaced by Ringo. So they're sort of the main drummers. But there's all kinds of different, like Andy White, because Andy played on Love Me Do, P.S. I Love You.
Exactly.
Yeah, and Jimmy Nicol, as we've just been saying.
Now, going back to Jimmy Nicol now, what do you know? Give me some insight into Jimmy Nicol while we're talking about that. Then I'll ask you another question.
Well, one of the interesting things with Jimmy Nicol is that he was doing work as a session drummer earlier in '64. And there was a guy who'd come up with this concept of trying to put out cheap EPs, plastic EPs. There you go.
Yeah.
Give you a mention. And so he thought, let's get some session musicians together and we'll do covers of the top hits and will put out 6 songs on an EP. But because it's not the original artist, it's a lot cheaper. And so they run that, and it was called Top 6. But of course, the band having all the big hits in early '64 was the Beatles. Jimmy Nicol was the session drummer playing on those records. So actually, Jimmy had already learned quite a lot of the current Beatles songs when he got the phone call. Now, the first guy who was asked was Bobby Graham, great drummer. Bobby Graham had also turned the Beatles down in the summer of 1962. He was the first drummer asked to replace Pete Best, and Bobby Graham said no. So then he turned the Beatles down for a second time for the world tour, but he recommended Jimmy Nicol. Jimmy joins in. They get like a day, and then they're already off on the world tour. And so he sits in for those couple of weeks. Really, really good drummer. Really good drummer. Took him a little bit just to get settled in. And of course, his favourite phrase when they said, "How are you getting on?" Jimmy would say, "Well, it's getting better."
Yeah, and I believe that Paul McCartney probably got that phrase and put it in the song in Sgt. Pepper. I wouldn't be surprised, because he used to turn around, or John used to turn around, I believe, and ask Jimmy, "How you going?" And he goes, "Oh, it's getting better." Exactly. John used to ask him. That's right.
Yeah, and John, and they used to turn around and sort of give him the nod.
That's right.
And then he'd be all right, and off he'd go. So
Jimmy, I do know a little bit about the Beatles.
Never heard of them.
Now listen, I want to know about Chaz Newbury.
Oh,
this guy gets asked to play bass in the Beatles, yeah?
Yeah.
And then what happens? Did they ask him if he permanently wanted to join the Beatles?
Well, Chaz, I tracked him down when I was doing my first book, which is called Liverpool. Came out, first edition was 2009. So that's the first book I'd ever written. And I tracked Chaz down. And he was playing in a group called the Blackjacks with Pete Best. When Pete went off to Hamburg, Chaz had gone off to university. He was back at the Christmas time. And because Stuart had stayed in Hamburg, but Pete, Paul, John and George were back in Liverpool, they asked Chaz to step in because Stuart wasn't there. And so for those 4 gigs over the Christmas holidays, Chaz stepped in. So, and this is my favourite bit of Beatles trivia. If you ever want to catch out your Beatles friends, right, you say to them, after Stuart stayed in Hamburg with Astrid, who became the Beatles' left-handed bass player? And virtually everybody will say Paul McCartney. And it was Chaz Newby. Because Chaz was left-handed. And Paul didn't become bass player for about another 6 months.
I've got another question for you now. Tell me this is true. You know Jerry Marsden, don't you?
Yeah.
Okay. I want to interview Jerry Marsden, so I'm sure you can sort that out for me. But is it true that his brother got asked to be drummer permanent in the Beatles?
Funny enough, I had this conversation with somebody yesterday.
Okay, there you go.
It crops up all the time. There were a number of drummers who were considered, who were competent ones. In total, 4 drummers were asked. Bobby Graham was the first one, turned him down. Richie Galvin from Earl Preston and TTs turned him down. Ringo was asked, and Johnny Hutchinson from the Big Three was asked. Ringo was the guy who said yeah. Freddie Marsden was one of those being considered, as were a number of others. But according to Jerry, Freddie was never formally offered the job, and there's no evidence that he was ever offered the job formally.
Well, that's information. But as I said, you know, you got to look at it like this way. They do How Do You Do It? Beatles don't want to do it. Jerry Marsden gets the demo. The song's already done. I'll take it, guys. Don't worry. It goes to number 1. Boom. 3 number 1s in a row.
Yeah.
And then what happens is Frankie goes to Hollywood, does like the same thing 3 songs in a row. So what does he do? Does a Jerry Marsden song. On the flip side, I've heard this story, if it's right or not. Jerry Marsden goes to his bank account. There's 300,000 there, and Jerry goes, "Thank you very much."
I don't know about that one.
That's what I heard.
Yeah, that's a new one on me.
Well, you ask him. Actually, I'll ask him.
He's a good guy. He's not been in the best of health with Jerry.
Okay. Now I want to ask you. Let's get on to Charles Rosen. He does fantastic tours to Liverpool, and you're a guide. You're still guiding people, aren't you?
Yeah, I am. I think it's the very first show I ever did after Liverpool came out was with Charles over in Stamford, Connecticut. So that was my first ever trip to America, and that was with Charles, and an amazing weekend. And so we become friends from then. He does these amazing trips with folks from America, and he'll bring them over with the main thing ending up at Liverpool Beetle Week at the end of August. But he'll take in London and then build something else into it. So it could be like going over to Hamburg or doing something else. Whatever. He does these amazing trips for people, and they must be good because there's a number of times, because I now do his tour when they come to Liverpool for Beetle Week. We then get a coach and I take them around for the day. And there's people on there who've been coming back second or third time. So they love what Charles does. And he's been coming since the 70s. And he knows so many people. It's amazing. So, he's a good guy, is Charles. So we always have fun. Always have fun.
I know. He loves you. Like he loves me. I'm like his brother from Australia. Anyway, let me tell you this. I love Stirring, and you love Stirring too. He's such a great guy. Really is.
Oh, yeah. Now, we have good fun. We have real good fun.
Of course, it's all about good fun here. That's why we're talking about him, because he's sending messages to me left, right, and centre while I do interviews. I love it. He's prompting me on questions too. Now, listen, how big are the groups when they come across his group?
Well, we normally get together a coach. So he's normally got a group of about 30.
Yep, that's good. Good size.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, very good size group. Do they do all the stuff that goes on at Liverpool Beetle Week for all the various events and stuff? And then he does additional things. So then when we've done the few days, then I take them out for a day. And we go to places that a lot of the standard Beatles tours don't go to. So we do stuff in Liverpool, then I take them over to the Wirral. We go to unusual places like Hume Hall, which is the place where Ringo made his debut with the Beatles. So it's a really important place. But because it's not actually in Liverpool, it's on the other side of the River Mersey. We get a ferry, cross the Mersey. There's Jerry again.
Ferry, across the Mersey. Exactly.
And then we take them off to Hume Hall, where Ringo made his debut. And there's some fabulous places over there, which not many people get to. So we spend the whole day together, and we stop by Penny Lane. We have lunch around here. I tell them all the stories of the places, and we go and explore. And then suddenly, we started at 9 a.m. and we're finishing around 5:30, 5:45 in the evening, because then they're off for an evening event. But we just have such a good time, and the groups are always brilliant, always good fun.
Now tell me about Road Best's museum. I want to know about that in Matthew Street. Please tell me how fantastic that is, and everybody that comes to Liverpool must make that a priority. Tell me how great that is.
There are so many people who don't know about, first of all, the Casbah, which was the first proper rock and roll club, which Mona Best, Pete, the Rory and Rogue's mum, ran. Really birthplace of the Beatles. You can go for private tours there. Fantastic place, the Casbah. I mean, I must have been probably 100 times. And I say to everybody, you have to go and see the Casbah. But now, what Rogue's done with Pete, and a guy called Paul Parry from Pete's band, they've opened up at the bottom of Matthew Street, so they're about 100 yards down from the Cavern, just before the Grapes pub. We're now called the Liverpool Beatles Museum. And it's on, I think it's about five floors. And some of the stuff, because my passion's always been the early years, the Liverpool years.
Me too, I'm into that.
So the stuff there you won't see anywhere else. So there's a lot of stuff that was Pete's. And they've got some amazing bits of memorabilia. So you're going in and you got bits, you got great photos, you got bits of video. And of course, the key thing, if people don't know about the Casbah, is there's the quote that the Best Brothers put in their book, The True Beginnings, from Paul McCartney. Well, they have the video playing there, and Paul's saying, everybody knows about the Cavern. Said, but the Casbah is where it started. We looked on it as our personal club. Now, that's what Paul says. That's how important the Casbah is. So when I did my book, Liverpool, I did a huge chapter just on the Casbah because not enough people know about it. So now we've got some of those stories. So you can see the Casbah, but then you go to the new museum that Rogue's running, and some of the stuff, and it's all original stuff in there. A lot of Pete's stuff that he'd kept from his time with the Beatles. And they've got all kinds of stuff. It's a really good Beatles museum to go and see. So we've got two here. We've got the Beatles story, which does the whole of the Beatles journey, which again, fantastic museum to go and see. And now we got Rogue's one as well, which is definitely well worth seeing.
Great. I know about the other places they go to. What is it? There's another Beatles place there too.
So your main Beatles places to see in the city centre. Say the Beatles story, Rogue's Museum, the Cavern.
I'm just going to say his museum is actually the best Beatle museum in the world. It's world class. That's what people need to know.
Oh, yeah, because you got stuff there which is unique, and that's what you want from a museum. You want something that when you go in there, you're not going to say, "Well, I've seen that somewhere else." You've got to have something original, and they've got their own story to tell there. But of course, the other bit, as well as having Pete's stuff from his 2 years with the Beatles and all the stuff from the running of the Casbah, you then got Rogue's dad, who of course was Neil Aspinall,
the Beatles roadie. Imagine how much stuff he collected. That's unbelievable.
Yeah, and
I'm going to say something. Mona Best was actually managing the Beatles at one point. That's
exactly.
True.
Absolutely right. Because
there's a lot of things I know, and I'll tell you another thing. For Sgt. Pepper's, John Lennon remembered that the Best family had medals.
Yeah.
And he asked for the medals, and he wore the medals on the cover of the costume for the photo of the Sgt. Pepper album. Am I right or not?
Yeah. He wears those on his jacket. So there's lots of other photos that they took that day, and you can see John wearing the medals. And there's a small trophy near the front on the Sgt. Pepper. So again, that and the medals are in Rogue's Museum.
See, there you go. That's unbelievable there. Who knew that? I knew that.
So all this stuff that Neil was buying for his son Rogue and sending back to him. And so you've got these 4 or 5 floors just full of this stuff which goes through the whole of the Beatles story. And it's amazing original stuff. So
I'll tell you what. When Charles Rosenay pays for my ticket to come from Australia to help with the tour, you're going to give me a personal tour.
You're on.
Absolutely. Limousine and you'll explain to me.
Yeah. My pleasure. I enjoy giving the tours, So, a lot of my time is researching and writing, but, doing the personal tours as well. I've been doing because with Liverpool Beatles tours, so it's nice and easy to remember. And it's great because they're private tours, so it tends to be like either an individual, or a couple, or a family, and just taking them out. So everyone is different because everybody's Beatles story is different and from all over the world. So yeah, you'd fit well in, definitely.
Don't worry, Charles. I'll be buying my own ticket to go to Liverpool. Don't worry.
No, panic him a little bit longer.
Don't worry, I can afford to pay my way. I'm just going to get a canoe from Melbourne, and I should be there in about the year 3000.
Yeah,
anyway, getting back to the tour, can you tell me about how the gates from Strawberry Fields went missing? What happened there?
Yeah, this was quite a few years ago now. And, of course, Strawberry Field, owned by the Salvation Army, and it closed in 2005, and nothing was going on. And then suddenly the cry went up, somebody's stolen the gates. And, there's certain lines that you don't cross. As soon as it went out on the jungle drums and the paper and then everywhere went mad, they mysteriously then turned up rather quickly in an anonymous scrap metal yard. Because I think people have seen them because they're worth a lot of money and not realizing you can't actually go and try and do anything with the Strawberry Field gates. So
David, is this true now that they've got the original gates in storage and the ones outside aren't the original gates. Is that true or not? I read that somewhere.
No, what they did was the originals came back straight away, but some of the visitors were coming and were starting to flick bits of paint off them. So they were starting to rust. So what they did was they took the originals off for restoration, put replica gates on. So what you now see there are the replicas, but because last year the Salvation Army opened up Strawberry Field brand new visitor centre, which is absolutely amazing, and you can now walk around the grounds where John used to go, and the original gates are inside, so you can see the original gates in there as well. Sometimes
when you read the net you get the right information, but sometimes when you read the net,
yeah,
you get the wrong information. Now, has Paul McCartney come over to your house for tea lately?
Let me check my diary. I'm trying to remember. He texted me just before.
What about Ringo? Does he bring you pieces of cake?
If only, because of course my connection with the Beatles is sort of via Ringo, because where Ringo was born, Madryn Street, at the bottom of Madryn Street is South Street. That's where I grew up. So the school that Ringo went to was St. Silas Primary School. That's the school that I went to. So I went to Ringo's school, and I lived in the area, in the Dingle area where Ringo was from, till I was 24. And then
Ringo left by then, didn't he, when you were living there?
Yeah, because by the time I started school, that was 1969.
Okay.
So I thought I'll leave my Beatles stuff behind. I'll leave the Dingle, and I go somewhere quiet like Penny Lane.
Well, that's right. That's unbelievable. I'm sure you played Penny Lane every day at home.
Well, we're so used to it, because I've got 3 daughters, right? Yeah. And they were all born in Oxford Street Hospital, where John Lennon was born.
Okay.
And the primary school they went to is Dovedale School, which is where John Lennon and George Harrison went to.
Then that's where Michael Hill went.
And that's where Michael went as well. Yeah.
Great. Now, listen, is the barber still in Penny Lane? The original barber shop with the barber? Yeah.
No, the original barber, Mr. Bioletti. Bioletti's closed, but there is still a barber shop on that location. It's still there. It's now called Tony Slavin, not Bioletti's, but it's still the same building, exact same location.
If I came to Liverpool, right, you've told me a few things, right? Now, down the dock there, they've got those fantastic new statues. And I saw a picture of Charles Rosenet standing in front of them, very proud.
Yeah, well, we took that on the day tour that I did for Charles. We always grab everybody, do a group photo in front of the statues before we get on the ferry. They are absolutely amazing. And the sculptor, Andy Edwards, did a very clever thing, is that he made them larger than life. So when you stand in front of them and have your picture, you can still see the Beatles' heads. You still see what they are, but they are fantastic.
So the ships coming into the port, they can see the Beatles' heads now from out in sea.
Well, the bigger ships can't come that far down, unfortunately. It's only the ferries.
That's it. Yeah, I'm glad you got it. Now let's talk about your books, David.
Yeah,
it's your time to shine now. Since we talked about everybody that you know that I've learned to know now. Anyway, tell me about these books now. What books you've released? You told me about the first one. What was that called again?
So the first one was called Liverpool, Birthplace of the Beatles. So that's now in its 3rd edition, and it's still the only major book on the Beatles and Liverpool, and nobody had done it before. And so I spent 9 years working on this book. I'm a slow writer.
Unbelievable.
So it took 9 years, and it's still the only Beatles book about Liverpool. So I interviewed loads of the people who were there at the time, like the Quarrymen, Beatles manager Alan Williams, Pete Best, and Pete actually said, would you consider writing the foreword to the book? And Pete said yes. So the foreword to my book is written by Pete Best. So I interviewed all these people who were part of the Liverpool Beatles story. And then I looked at all the meanings of the songs with Liverpool links, like Penny Lane, Strawberry Fields, Forever. And then the back section of the book is like a tour guide. So if you want to come to Liverpool, but you can't quite row there yet, or your canoe's not powerful enough,
That's right. I need a speedboat.
So therefore, you can look at the back of the book and split down by suburbs. I've done maps, photographs, and information on every location connected to the Beatles. So you can do your own Beatles tour of Liverpool in my book.
It's better to do it with you as a group. Charles Rosenay organises if you're in the US. I think that tours, you get everybody from the world can join that tour, can't you?
Oh, there's all kinds of people come with Charles, but I think they tend to start from the US. But we'll let Charles handle that one.
Have you had many Australians come across?
Oh yeah. We had some avid Aussies with us. Brilliant, always good fun. In fact, I had a very, very good friend of mine who was from Melbourne.
Say hello to him. Say hello.
He's no longer with us, sadly. And we became real good friends. And he just came over with his brother to do a Beatles tour years and years ago. And we just became real good mates. And we stayed good mates. So, Chris, really lovely guy. So we miss him. So, got good friends in us.
If I wanted a Beatle T-shirt and you're the expert and I paid for it, where would you get an extra large Beatle T-shirt for me? Where would be the one that you think I should get it from where? Because you're already there. I don't have to come.
Well, it's a really good shop at the top of Matthew Street, the Hard Day's Night shop. And they've got all the licensed stuff from Apple. So you get the genuine stuff.
I'll go on the web and check that one out.
Yeah,
that's fantastic. Now, continue about your books. How many books have you written in total?
Right, so Liverpool was the first one.
Yeah,
I followed that one up in 2013 with a book called The Fab 104, and this was looking at every musician who played with the group from 1956 through to 1962, any other band that they'd been in, and then I went and looked for the people who taught the Beatles to play as well. And by coincidence, I ended up with 104 people. So it's called the Fab 104, the evolution of the Beatles. So if you want to know how they went from being the Quarrymen and end up being John, Paul, George and Ringo, this is the book. And it's got, well over 500 pictures in there. There's stuff in there you will not find in any other book. The stories that I've uncovered, you won't find in any other book. The guy I mentioned before, Norman Chapman, nobody really knew much about him. And I was able to track down his daughter. And she gave me the exclusive story. So we got his story and photographs. There'd never been a published photo of him ever before. So my book's the only one with any published photos in. So I love telling the stories of those people who played a part in the whole Beatles thing. So it's so much more than just John, Paul, George and Ringo.
Exactly. This is what it's about. It's about recognition. You're finding them and giving recognition. As exactly. I said, I mean, who knew? I got to contact Tommy. This guy called Michael Hill. He went to school with John Lennon, and I'm thinking, yeah. And he lives in Melbourne. I said, what?
Yeah.
You know, the guy lives where I am. And I was like blown away. And then I said, he's written a book.
Yeah.
He started telling me, and then he said he's got the book, showed me the book, and I was blown away.
Yeah.
He's the real deal.
Yeah. And of course, we did, so as well as my books, I've done a documentary film as well called Looking for Lennon.
That's good. And that's
all about John Lennon's early years. So we interviewed Michael as part of that.
That's
and we
great.
got together people who knew John. And it's probably the most thorough and accurate John Lennon documentary film that's been made. We got nominated for a National Film Award over here, and it's been sold. I've lost track, at least 25 countries around the world. So that was a real privilege to do, to tell John's story.
Where can you see that film? Can you see it on the net somewhere streaming?
Yes, you can do digital downloads. Over in the UK, it's still on our Sky Arts television as a download. So it has been for a couple of years now. So, so you just looking for Lennon.
Okay, sounds fantastic. That could be on one of the US streaming services.
It's all over the world. Yeah, the rights have been sold all over the place. So it's a great film. I'm very, very proud to be part of that.
Any other books now from the 104?
Yeah. So after that, each book sort of follows from the other. So a guy called Gary Popper, who was the producer for Looking for Lennon, he loved the Fab 104 book, and he said, "Do you know what you've done?" He said, "You've identified 12 drummers who played with the Beatles. Nobody's ever written about the Beatles drummers. Shall we do a book together?" I thought, yeah, why not? That'd be fun. And we were going to call it 12 Drummers Drumming until I found a 13th drummer. And then I kept finding more and more. And we ended up, say, with 23 drummers who played a part in the Beatles story. And then I started finding more and more drummers. So we got up to, I ended up with 23 different drummers who all played part in the story of the Beatles, 1970. Now, they had to have either played as part of the group, recorded with them, or been a part of something proper, like a concert or something like that. And that's how I ended up with 23 drummers. And so nobody's ever put them all together. But one of the things that have been bothering me from once I was started on Liverpool all those years ago was the biggest drummer story with the Beatles is why after 2 years was Pete Best replaced by Ringo Starr. And we've had all these theories since 1962. Why was Pete Best sacked? And I was determined to work it all out from the evidence. And I was getting all the quotes that I could find and saying, okay, what actual evidence do we have? But then I came across a guy called David Harris, who not many people know. David was Brian Epstein's lawyer. And David was the guy Brian asked for advice as to how to change the drummer. And that's when I got the bombshell, which nobody else had come across since 1962. Pete Best was never sacked. And I was sat there talking to David, and he was saying, Pete was never sacked. He couldn't have been sacked. I'm going, what? That doesn't make... What do you mean he wasn't sacked? We've been told since 1960s, you said Pete could not have been sacked because he was a member of the group, which in legal terms is a partnership. UK, look, you cannot sack a partner. They didn't have time to try and go through the legal process to sack him. So they had to trick Pete into thinking he was being sacked and get him to quit. And so that it's quite detailed. So I've got a whole chapter just explaining how that all happened. But this is like the biggest mystery we've had for the Beatles since, in their Beatles history, really, was why was Pete Best sacked? And I found out that he wasn't. And how all that happened. It's a fascinating little story.
That's intriguing.
When I was talking to this lawyer, and I was just, what? Now, thankfully, in my earlier life, I'd worked for an insurance company, a bit like Michael had done. And I did a qualification, one in English law and one in... So I understood the basics of legal contracts.
Sorry,
now
just say that again. It sort of froze a bit. You did your qualifications in?
Yeah, so I did qualifications in English law and in contract law as well. Now, Gary, who I was doing the book with, has extensive experience in the field of contracts of all sorts. He's worked in over the years. So the two of us got our heads together and we were talking it through. And it was all starting to make sense that, yeah, he could not have been sacked. So we had like this amazing story to tell that would change Beatles history.
And that's in that drama book. What's the name of that book?
And that one is called Finding the Fourth Beatle.
Okay.
Now, the reason it's called Finding the Fourth Beatle is a quote from Neil Aspinall, who said, "The story of the Beatles always seemed to be about John, Paul, George, and a drummer." So we thought that there was something going on, which meant they were always looking for their fourth member. Now, they had a number of drummers, but only a few of them spent any length of time with them. And of course, the main ones were Pete and Ringo.
Of course.
So we're looking at, okay, so we know legally Pete wasn't sacked, and we go through that. So then he comes back to, well, why did they want to get rid of Pete? Now, there's been all sorts of theories about this, all sorts of myths about his haircut. Pete couldn't play drums. I mean, I
don't believe that. I don't believe it.
No, I've played in bands since I was in my teens, and I'm not a drummer, but I've played with good drummers and bad drummers. You know very, very quickly if somebody can't play drums. Pete played more hours live with the Beatles than Ringo did, because of course the shows when Ringo was with them were only like 35 minutes long. Pete was playing 6-8 hours a night in Hamburg. So you know very quickly if someone's a bad drummer or a good drummer. So
and also he had a beat that was called like the atomic beat. When he played, that's right, when he played, it like rocketed the sound. It was like a sound no one had heard before because of the drum beat. Yeah. That's correct?
Absolutely right. And he was pounding on the bass drum. And that's what they developed in Hamburg, was to get the punters off the streets to come in and see them. And that was the sound they created. That's why they became, as John Lennon said, if you want to see the real Beatles, you had to have seen us in Liverpool or Hamburg in our black leathers. And that was the time with Pete. They became the top band in Liverpool and Hamburg while Pete was with them. So you have to think, well, okay, so it's not because he's a bad drummer, because that excuse doesn't work. When you get down to the evidence, there's a lot of revisionism which says, they saw Ringo and they wanted Ringo, and so they said that they'll get rid of Pete. Well, that isn't backed up with evidence either. Now, they had played with Ringo before, and they knew what a top drummer he was. So we don't underestimate Ringo at all. So there had to be something that caused them to change their mind. And the evidence is quite clear. When they did their audition on the 6th of June, 1962 with George Martin, and also with legal stuff, we proved, it was an audition. They weren't under contract. It was definitely just an audition. George Martin said to Brian, okay, I don't mind what you do with the group, but if we come to make a record, I'm going to bring in a session drummer. Now, that's standard practice back then. It happened all the time. But Brian didn't understand that. Brian then has to tell John, Paul, and George. George Martin says he doesn't think Pete's good enough to play on the record. Now, we've got that in quotes, particularly from Paul, of saying, well, we know he's a great drummer when we're playing live, but if our producer doesn't think he's good enough, and this is our last chance of a record deal, then we're going to have to find another drummer. So that's why they then look for another drummer. So
and then the irony is they find Ringo and they don't let him play either on Love Me Do.
Well, exactly. And this is it. So Ringo wasn't even the first drummer asked. So Bobby Graham was asked, he turned him down. Richie Galvin turned him down. Johnny Hutch turned him down. Ringo said yes. But, and this is the important bit in the story, even though Ringo thinks he didn't play on the first single, he actually did, probably by mistake.
He played tambourine on one version, and White drummed, and then he did the other version where he is drumming. That's correct?
Yeah. So the version which George Martin didn't think was good enough, and where he wants to replace Ringo with Andy White, actually came out as the single. So Ringo thought he didn't play on the single, but he did. But actually, the second version he did with Andy White, with Ringo on tambourine, is the one that was issued on the Please Please Me album and every other release after that. So they end up with Ringo. And I want to do this in the most diplomatic way, because the reason we called the book Finding the Fourth Beatle was, even if it wasn't by design, and even if he wasn't the first drummer to be asked, Ringo was the right person for the job. And when you go back through Beatles history, John has his quarrymen and they're limited. They need somebody better. Paul turns up, Paul joins the group, they get better. But they need a better lead guitarist, so they get George. They need a bass player, so they get Stuart Sutcliffe. But they really need to step it up a notch. Stuart quits, Paul takes over on bass. They need a good drummer, they get Pete in. They get to the stage of needing to record, and they're about to become a very, very different band. And the way I put it in the book is that when Pete left in the summer of '62, that was the end of the group known as the Beatles. And it was the birth of a brand new group called the Fab Four, who were a pop group. The old band were brilliant for rock and roll and R&B covers. This new group had to know how to record in the studio and make pop songs. And if you see them as two different bands, you don't have to get people discrediting Pete Best, because he was a great drummer for what they were doing. But for this new group they became, they could not have got anybody better than Ringo, because he is so underrated. And that's what we wanted to do in the book, was to tell all these stories. But I then interviewed lots of drummers to please explain to me why Ringo is so good. And so we go through this drum analysis of his unique style. He was so innovative. He could play a song. He reinvented the role of the drummer. And if you ever saw that great bit of film when he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, got some of the greatest drummers in the world all saying, we wanted to play like Ringo. Ringo was the inspiration. He was the king of swing. He was the guy. And that's where we get the book. So we go through all these different drummers who came and went. But it's a celebration of the fourth Beatle, who is Ringo.
I'm fascinated. I've got to ask you this now and clarify this.
Okay.
When they found Ringo, now there's different stories, right? Of how they made Ringo join the group. There's stories like Paul and John drove and saw him. No, Brian went there, or Brian rang him. That's not, to me, it's clarified the real story, how he accepted the job. Who contacted him? Was it John and Paul, or was it Brian?
The answer is yes to bits of all of that. What I found when I was doing the research for the Fab 104 book, I came across an interview that Ringo had given in November 1962. So at that stage, the Beatles weren't famous. Their first record had only just come out. And Ringo told his story of how he became the Beatles drummer. Nice and clear. He said George Harrison went to his house on a Friday evening. Ringo was at Butlins with Rory Storm and the Hurricanes. George left a message for Ringo to call him the next day. Ringo spoke to George on the Saturday. George said, come down to the Odd Spot Club in Liverpool. Come and see the band. We want to talk to you. Ringo goes down. At the end of the night, when Pete and Neil take the gear back to the Casbah, John, Paul and George take Ringo over to meet Brian at the Blue Angel Club. That is where Brian offers him the job. Says, do you want to be the new drummer? And Ringo says, yes. And Brian said, okay, what I'll do is I'll try and sort everything out and I'll give you a call on Tuesday. Because, of course, he was going back to Butlins. So Ringo then says, he then gets a phone call at Butlins from Brian on the Tuesday evening, confirming the job. Now, if John and Paul had gone, and Ringo's never mentioned John and Paul going over. It was Johnny Guitar who mentioned it. John and Paul could have driven over on the Monday because they had the day off then. So that is possible, but there's no proof of it. But Brian spoke to Ringo on the Tuesday. Brian then sees Pete in his office on the Wednesday afternoon. He lets Pete think that he's being sacked, because actually what Brian said was, the boys want you out, i.e. your partners want to get rid of you, and Ringo's joining Saturday. Brian never told Pete he was sacked, but the implication was, you're being replaced. And Ringo joins on the Saturday. So actually, in Ringo's own words, it all happened in 1 week, Saturday to Saturday. That's how he became the Beatles drummer.
Yeah, it's like, what can I say? It's fascinating. And these stories, I'm just saying, just generally, the Beatles, let's say folklore, I mean, how can you clarify some stories where some stories, like, clarify this. Did the guy come into Nems and buy the record and say, I want the one by the Beatles? What was the guy's name?
Raymond Jones.
Yeah. Is that true?
Yes, because in my Liverpool book, the first book, I interviewed Alistair Taylor, who was Brian Epstein's PA. Now, Raymond Jones, he lived in Liverpool, so he's well known about. He's been traced down. No, years later giving interviews and stuff. He was one of a number of Beatles fans who were coming in and asking for this record. Now, what Alistair Taylor says is, because for years he'd said he was Raymond Jones. And what he clarified was, Raymond Jones was coming in and the other fans saying, we want the record. But until somebody ordered it, they couldn't go and track it down. So because Alistair knew there was demand, he made up an order in the name of Raymond Jones, a good customer. And they then tracked down My Bonnie being released in Germany on Polydor. And Brian imported them, sold them. He got some more. He sold those out. And because of that, then Brian goes to the cavern and watches the Beatles and becomes the manager.
Now, what about this other rumor? What's the rumor that Brian bought all the copies or something of Love Me Do to get it in the charts? Have you heard that rumor?
Oh, yeah, that's a popular one.
Yeah, good.
So you could do that, and you could affect the chart in Liverpool, but not across the country, because the way charts are compiled, you'd have to have targeted so many different record stores around the country and make sure you targeted the right ones so that they were the people who were rung up on the day when they were doing the polls. So he may have got some to give away as promotional copies and to affect the local market, but nationally, he couldn't really have had much of an impact on it. So I think we'll leave that one to a popular myth.
Yeah, okay. Now, when you do the tours, do you go past Brian's family home and things like that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we always go past. So we go to the Dingle, where Ringo was from. So we got to see, and of course, that's my neighbourhood. So I know that so well. Obviously, we go to Penny Lane. And again, when I did Liverpool, I found out the full, proper meaning of the song of Penny Lane. Because I found out who the pretty nurse was in the song. People thought the song was written by Paul and the nurse was in the song because Paul's mum was a nurse. And I was able to prove that the last verse was written by John and find out who the pretty nurse was. And there's no connection to Paul whatsoever. So that was John's verse.
Who's the nurse?
Her name was Beth Davidson, and she was the girlfriend of John Lennon's best mate, Pete Shotton. And she married Pete. So John put his best mate's wife in the Beatles song and nobody knew about it. So these are the kind of things that keep me occupied.
Who's Norwegian Wood about?
Now that one, the story was one of the relationships that John had down in London with the photographer's wife who was in the flat above them. So there's part of that, and there's a few other little bits of stories that are interwoven in there as well.
Sure, we won't get into those details. But other than that, now, is there any other books that you've done?
Oh, well, I helped to co-author a book with Hunter Davies, of course, the original Beatles biographer.
Yeah, of course.
There's four of us. We did a book called The Beatles Book. So that was myself, Hunter as the editor and main author, with me, Spencer Lee, who's a Liverpool author and broadcaster, and Keith Badman, London-based author again. So we did that a few years back. I'm actually working on, I think it's about 5 books at the moment, trying to juggle them all. I've got one I've just about finished, which is going to be called The Country of Liverpool. And this is the story of the country music scene in Liverpool from the 40s onwards and the country roots of the Beatles. Because most people don't know is that in the 60s, Liverpool was known as the Nashville of the North, the Nashville of England. We had the biggest country and western scene in Europe.
Never heard of that.
And the country roots of the Beatles are all there, skiffle as its roots in country. And then I've gone through all the Beatles albums, and I think it's about 23 or 24 songs which are clearly country songs. And then you got the roots. So after they left, obviously Ringo did his Buku's of Blues country album. Paul went out and recorded in Nashville, Junior's Farm, and all those songs. So I've got some great photos and great stories and how much country music influenced the sound of the Beatles. So that one's nearly ready to publish. I
saw the photo of Paul in Nashville with a cowboy hat. He's wearing like a T-shirt and pants. You wouldn't recognize him. He looked like a cowboy. You've seen that, yeah?
Yeah. Well, there's a guy called Dan Ely, and he found out that Paul was going to be staying in Nashville for a couple of weeks. He got a letter, I think it was from Melody Maker, music paper over here. And he said, I'll go and try and interview him. He ended up spending a couple of weeks on the farm with Paul, Linda, Denny, all of Wings who were there. He's got photos. So he's given me his story and let me use some of his photos in the book. They're amazing, amazing stories. So that one's been real good fun. It's to do the country routes of the Beatles.
Now, I've got to ask you, David.
Yep.
They want to go over everywhere where they can find you again, and we'll make a wrap, but we'll be speaking again in another interview. Don't worry about that.
Oh,
so
pleasure.
just tell everybody where they can find your books on the net, what they need to do to track you down.
Okay, so the first thing to do, if you want to find out more about me, I do a lot of blogs and talk about my books, davidabedford.com. So that's my website, davidabedford.com. Plus also then you can go on, as I mentioned before, this brand new Beatles bookstore that we've launched, and that is just beatlesbookstore.com. So go on there and you'll find my books, Michael's book, Jude's books. We've got over 30 books on there already just in the first month. So it's a great place to find new and exciting Beatles books. So davidabedford.com and beatlesbookstore.com.
Fantastic. And on Facebook, you got a page?
I manage a number of pages, but again, just look for David Bedford and you'll find me very, very quickly. But if you look under Liverpool, Fab 104, the country of Liverpool, you'll find me. And through the British Beatles fan club, and that's when I did my first writing, and I still write for the quarterly magazine for the British Beatles fan club. So you can find me through there as well. We do a quarterly colour magazine. So I'm always very proud of my association with them as well.
That's fantastic, David. As I said, we have to wrap it up. Plastic EP can't thank you enough. Say goodbye to all your fans out there, and we'll speak again for sure. Been my pleasure.
Oh, it's been my absolute pleasure as well. Goodbye to everybody who knows me, and I hope I haven't scared anybody who doesn't know me. But yeah, come and check me out and drop me a message. Join me on Facebook. And Plastic EP, you're a legend. I look forward to another one of these. Good fun.
Me too. I loved it. All right, from both of us, we'll say goodbye.
Au revoir.
Bye.